And I am welcoming everyone this morning. Glad to have everyone on the call. We are going to spend about a half an hour together really breaking down really what Modern Your Way to a Million is all about. But more than anything, I hope that our intention here is to actually give you some value to take away. What you're going to see is just our process of diving deep into the Millionaire Real Estate Agent book. How do we take the 4 models out of the book? How do we implement them into our business? How do we build the model systems and tools that Gary Keller really pulled from all the top agents from around the country and regardless of company, and really wrote as the Frankenstein of best practices to run a huge business. We have been rolling out this course, Model Your Way to a Million, for probably now, three and a half, maybe 4 years. We're about to launch our 11th or 12th foray into Model Your Way to a Million, and I'll tell you, every single time I do it, I just get more and more passionate about bringing this information. I'll be the first person to say it's not my information, right? It's there in MREA, yet the brainchild of this course was the fact that the book has sold over 1 million copies, yet there aren't 1 million millionaire real estate agents walking around, and there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. And as I sat down and started diving into the Millionaire Real Estate Agent book, I thought, man, this is so simple. It is so simple, yet why aren't more of us doing it? Well, that could be seen on page 22. On page 22 of MREA, Gary says this, and many of you have heard me say this before. Gary says, your approach, your ability, and the willingness to do the work of the real estate sales will be the greatest determining factors of your success, right? So Gary Keller says there are 3 things that are going to stand between us and success. Us and success. And what are they? Approach, ability, and willingness. So what's interesting about that is approach, man, that can be learned. In fact, MREA is all about approach. Ability, that could be trained, right? That's training and coaching and consulting. The only thing that stands between us and becoming an MREA or having a business as big or as small as we ever wanted is just, are we willing to do the work? Now, most of us on the call are on the call because we've raised our hands and said, yes, I'm willing. Yes, I'm willing. So over a 10-week period of time, we're going to dive into, well, what's our approach? Then what's our ability, right? Are we following the same approach, and do we have the same ability of everybody that was compiled into writing this book? What's interesting is one of the main reasons why we typically don't is because we make it too complicated, right? We make it way too complicated. On page 26 and 27 of MREA, Gary says, here's what we know. No one can live in complexity for very long. Lasting success always lies in our ability to reduce things to their simplest form. We know that. That is a fact. Unfortunately, as real estate agents, what do we like to do? Complicate everything. Right? We are master complicators. In fact, on page 27 of MREA, Gary says, if we seek complex answers to complex questions, right, meaning that's most of us, we will spend our life chasing complexity. See, we come up with really complicated ways to solve complicated problems in our business. It doesn't matter what it is. Lead generation, man, do we complicate it. Follow-up, man, do we complicate it. Database, man, do we complicate it. Right? We're gonna uncomplicate all those items as we go through our 10 weeks together. But right after that, Gary said this. What we know is if we seek simple answers to complex questions, well, we'll find simple solutions and spend our life taking action, period. So the goal is, how do we take MREA and how do we simplify it? Well, that starts with modeling, right? That starts with modeling. When we hear the word model, we think, some of us think completely different things, right? Some of us think of a perfect human being, right? Like that's what they're named. And the reason why they're named that is because for whatever reason, and I would say or argue that it might be false reason, we look at that person and say, man, they look perfect. I want to look like that, or I wish I looked like that. Well, it's the same way for our business. It is the same way for our business. On page 35 and 36 of MREA, Gary starts quoting actually Tony Robbins in Unlimited Power. And when Tony said, hey, listen, people have lived before you. So Gary says to the real estate industry, listen, people have lived before you. right? Long ago, he said, I realized that success leaves clues, that people who produce outstanding results do specific things to create those results. And I think that's where we all start reading MREA. We start, right? We pull up the Millionaire Real Estate Agent book. We say, hey, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And then we don't do everything in it, right? What I like to say is we turn a model into a menu, right? We decide we want a number 1, a number 4, a number 8, a number 11 off of the menu, when in reality, on page 35, right before any of those models started, Gary said, hey, people that expect certain results have to do specific things. And so over the 10-week process that we'll spend together, we go through what are the very specific things from day 1, from day 2, from day 15, from day 30, from day 90, from year 3 in our business, right? Step by step, what are the simple solutions and the specific things we need to do to lay the groundwork to build that business? Now, on page 36 of MREA, Gary says, actions are the source of all results. The process of discovering exactly and specifically what people do to produce a specific result is called modeling. So going back, right, I'll take you back even, right, maybe I guess it was 7 years ago when I stepped back into production. I was a team leader before I stepped back into production and decided to build a team. The only reason why I did that was I had spent the previous 2 years coaching and teaching MREA, teaching the Red Book, and telling agents, right? And oftentimes we say, well, it's easier said than done, and we have to be careful about that because everything is easier said than done, right? Everything is easier said than done. However, what I realized was, if I've taught that and I've told people and I've coached agents that, man, if you just did these steps, you would have a business as big as you'd want, well, then it was time for me to step back in and say, hey, listen, I'm going to open up my door. I'm going to open up my business. I'm going to follow this model. I didn't have the luxury of getting creative because I had coached a model, and that was MREA. In fact, Gary says modeling is the pathway to excellence. Modeling is the pathway to excellence. We just have to choose a model and then follow it. Choose a model and then follow it. The last quote that is there on page, I think it's 36 of MREA, it's up on your screen on the bottom. It says, to model excellence, you should be a detective, an investigator, someone who asks lots of questions and tracks down all the clues to what produces excellence. And we think, well, why are we spending so much time on talking about modeling? Because unless we believe these facts, chances are we won't do it. Unless we believe these facts, chances are at a certain point in time, we're going to get creative. Or at a certain point in time, we're like, oh, I'm not going to do that. I don't need to do that. I don't like to do that. And I share that because believe me, I raised my hand as guilty as the person that had the book, right? I had the book 7 years, 8 years before I started modeling the book. I had the book at 2, 3 different companies. And yet what I found was there wasn't a simple process to follow or a model to follow for the book, and that's why we created Model Your Way to $1 Million. Now, here's what's so interesting to me. The models of the book don't start till page 128. The models of the book don't start until page 128. Now, my personality says, well, then get me to page 128, right? I want to get to work. Show me the models. I'll start working on them. But the problem for me was I often skipped the first 120 so pages of the book. And on page 71 of MREA, Gary said, here's what I know. After years of research and hundreds of interviews with top agents, there are 9 ways that the millionaire real estate agent thinks. And so we dive deep into this in this course, but I thought, let's just knock these out this morning together, right? We have a large group of agents on the call together. Let's go through these. These are the 9 ways the MREA thinks, and here's the reality of the situation. Unless we focus on this, unless these become the way that we think, it will be impossible to implement the 4 models, right? To implement the economic model, the lead gen model, the budget model, and the organizational model. We have to think this way. And then the first way, in fact, the first 2 ways, Gary said, are foundational. Everything else is supportive. So if we nail the first 2 ways, as Gary interviewed agents, these are the 2 things that showed up in their world. This is how they thought. The first one was they were powered by a big why. Right? They showed up every day in their business. They went to work every day. They pushed every day. Why? Well, to answer that question, why? Right? Because they were powered by a big why. And on page 74 of MREA, there's an interesting conversation. We won't go through it today because of time, but I challenge everybody to go find your MREA book, read page 74. One of the coolest conversations I've read. One of my favorite sections of the book where Gary actually has a conversation with someone about why money can't be your why, right? So yes, the book is named The Millionaire Real Estate Agent, but Gary will self-proclaim that that's just so that it has a snappy title and you'd buy it, right? Or you'd read it, right? Or you'd learn something from it. But we have to be powered by a big why. Foundationally, we have to figure that out. We go through some processes and some tools to help us do that in our course together. The second way the MREA thought was big goals and big models, right? They were powered by big goals and big models. Gary has often said, and more recently in all of our masterminds with him, has said, listen, you may or should never hit your goal that you set for yourself this year. And you're thinking, well, that's crazy. Like, the point of business is to hit some goals. Well, Gary said he's never hit a goal that he set for himself in 1 year. Why? Because they were really big goals. What happened was he had to create big models. He had to follow big models and actually create big habits on the way to hit those goals. Gary said these two things showed up in every MREA's world in a really, really big way. Think powered by a big why and think big goals and big models. Now, there are 7 more that are supportive, right? What Gary realized is people thought possibilities, they thought action, right? So think possibilities, think action. Now, 4 is interesting. Number 4 on your screen is interesting, right? Write that down. Think about it later today. Do we think action? Are we constantly in movement? Gary Keller in MREA on page 84 says the problem for most, right? The problem for most agents is we assemble everything we need to pursue success, right? So we have everything we need. And then he said instead of actually pursuing it, we decide to think about it some more. He said we hide behind continual inaction while calling it something altogether. We call it additional research. We call it planning. We call it preparation. We call it, right? Some of us are raising our hands guilty. Like, we have to think action. The MREA thinks action. What I'll tell you is the 10 weeks that we'll spend together, and I hope we all spend it together, but the 10-week course, Model Your Way to $1 Million, is built and structured to push us into action, to push us into building, right, systems, tools, and models, and implementing things in each one of those models so that we can't hide behind additional research, planning, or preparation. I'll guarantee you that. Number 5, think without fear. Number 6, think progress, right? It's a process, so we need to think progressively. Number 7, my favorite, that we talk a lot about in our course, think competitively and strategically. Every model should be built on this competitive and strategic thinking. And 8 and 9, 2 of my favorites, because people think, no, Chris, this isn't for me. I don't want a business that big because people come to me, they work with me. I have such high standards. I give great service. Well, guess what? Every top agent that Gary interviewed, 2 of the ways that they thought was thinking standards, thinking service. It was so critically important to them. They focused on it, think standards and think service. And we're going to talk about things that we need to implement in our business to make sure those standards and that service only improves as we grow instead of falling apart. Now, one of my favorite portions, right? One of my favorite things that Gary ever gave us was the 6 personal perspectives. Man, we will spend almost an entire call on the 6 personal perspectives and understanding the difference between how someone thinks and what perspective is, right? Perspective, we all come to the table, right? We come to the table with perspective based on how we were raised, based on where we grew up, based on maybe what we had or what we didn't have. And what Gary says is we need to change our perspective. I will tell you, sitting in front of me right now is one of the 6 personal perspectives. At all times, we'll talk about how do we begin to shape or mold or adjust our perspective. And what are those perspectives? Committing to self-mastery, committing to the 80-20 principle, moving from E to P, right? Being entrepreneurial to purposeful. We'll talk about tactical ways to do that. Being learning-based, but making that as the foundation of your action plan, removing limiting beliefs, and ultimately, one of my favorite pages, we'll dive deep in MREA, is page 167, which is being accountable. How are we accountable? Now, once we get our mindset right, once we get our perspective right, we'll dive into the 8 goal categories of the MREA. Here's what's so interesting to me, right? I had read that book multiple times, and what I realized at a certain point in time is so much was broken in my business because it came down to me not focusing on the 8 goal categories of the MREA. There are 8 specific goals of every business person in real estate, and those goals need to be tracked. We need to have a system to track them. It's leads generated, it's listings, it's contracts written, contracts closed, money, people. People, interestingly enough, is a goal. Systems and tools, goal, and then personal education. Those 8 goal categories, we'll talk at length about how to implement those goal categories into our business, but also how do I track them? And later on, how do those goal categories show up in our budget model? How do those goal categories show up in our lead generation model? Ultimately, how does that goal category show up in our organizational model as well? Now, in order to do that, one of my favorite concepts, and I talk about this a lot with my organization, my team, and anytime I'm in front of a group of agents, is it's this work to learn versus work to earn phase. Now, on page 69 of MREA, again, I don't know how many times I skipped this, but probably on time 17, 18, maybe 19 of reading this book, the light went off. And in fact, the first couple times I taught the course, this wasn't a heavy section in it, this work to learn versus work to earn phase. But here's what Gary says in that section. Our industry does us a disservice, right? Our industry does us a disservice because we are oftentimes pushed into a work to earn model, right? Our industry says, hey, here's the deal. Come and find a buyer. Work with that buyer. Close that buyer. We'll give you a check. And for most of us, that check is the biggest check we've ever received. And we think, that was awesome, I'm going to do it again. And then we go out and do it again, and do it again, and do it again. Same thing with the seller. You find a seller, you list their house, it sells, you get a check. You're working to earn. And the problem with that is so many of us, myself included, prior to focusing on these models, so many of us built a career, 6, 5, 7, 15, 30 years in the business, knowing how to represent buyers incredibly, knowing how to represent sellers incredibly, but we never took the time to do a work to learn phase in our business. Right? Doctors have to go to school for about 11, 12 years until they get the right to practice medicine. Yet 30 days later, we have a real estate license and we're earning money. And because of that, we haven't spent the time necessary to really understand the models of MREA. Gary's confident that, man, if real estate forced our industry or anyone entering the industry to study or to deep dive MREA, even if they did a 30, 60, 90, 120-day course on MREA, they'd be a lot better off. And their earnings would go up exponentially because they worked to learn. So we're going to talk a lot about that work to learn phase. In fact, the Model Your Way to $1 Million was built as that work to learn phase. And I get it. We're all in production, most of us, right? We're all going out there and working in the business. Now we have to dedicate some time, separate some time every single week to work on the business. And that's what Model Your Way to $1 Million does. So let's just briefly get an overview of what are these models. Most of us know them, but let's just talk about them in a little bit more detail. The first model is the economic model, right? The economic model. What Gary Keller says is this: every business has one. We may just not know what ours is. Every business has one. We may just not know what ours is. Interestingly enough, we make business decisions every day in our business that affect our life. This model, the economic model, allows us to create or build the life that we should choose. And I feel very strongly about that because, for instance, on your screen is a basic formula for the economic model. Now, this is an economic model for an agent that their average sales price is $300,000, their average commission is 3%, right? And they wanted to net $1 million. But as we spend some time together, you'll see that there are a few things that will change along the way. We decide that. We design our business around the economic model. In fact, if we don't have one built out, if we can't pull ours out, if it's not on our desk written or on our computer typed up, then chances are the business decisions we're making aren't strategic, aren't competitive, aren't purposeful. So this economic model will one, set an income goal, which basically funds or fuels the life or the why that we've already chosen or we've built into our business. And at the end of the day, At the end of the day, we're going to get to how many appointments do I need to go on. At the end of the day, the economic model will tell you, hey, your life is going to look like this. Your life is going to look like 21 listing appointments and 21 buyer appointments a month in order to net $1 million. Now, chances are at this point in your business, you also have an organizational model, so don't get stressed out. You're not going to do all that. But here's what shows up. Here's what shows up in this model. The most important thing is if I need that many appointments, based on the economic model I set, how many leads do I need? Right? So your economic model will flow right into your lead generation model. Once we set some parameters around our business, we're going to have a lead generation model. Now here's the problem with the lead generation model. Many of us are phenomenal, right? Many of us are phenomenal at lead generation. We're phenomenal at the lead generation activity, yet we haven't turned it into a model. And I would say this is where most of us fall down. Most of us do the activity, but truly can't answer the question, is our lead generation a model? Is it duplicatable? Is it replicatable? Is it leverageable? Right? And do we have a critical path? Once we do that activity, what happens? And Gary says that your database is your business. So here's an interesting point to take away today. Building up the number of names in it and the relationship with those names is really at the very core of what building a real estate business is all about, right? The size of your real estate sales business will be in direct proportion to the size, weight, and quality of your database. It can't be either or. It has to be and, right? It can't be, oh, it's just huge. I have a huge database, or, oh, man, I just work with people that are just high-quality leads. The reality is we're going to work on building out a model that will continue to build the size, but also increase the quality of the relationship with the people in the database. And that's the key. That's the key. So we'll go through the three key areas of the lead gen model: prospecting and marketing, right? Setting up the database, feeding it constantly, and then systematic marketing to the database. What does that 8x8 look like? What does that 12 direct look like? What does that 33 touch look like? We'll actually also share some of the updated parameters of the lead generation model that you'll see come out in MREA2 that we've been part of collaborating with Gary and some top agents with and around. But the lead generation model answers the question, how am I going to get the appointments I need to hit my economic model? Now, what happens when you generate some leads? You're going to close some deals. And what happens when you close some deals? Guess what? You're going to make some money. And so if you don't have a budget model, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. And so the economic model rolls into the lead generation model, right? And that's probably the most time intensive. We'll spend a lot of time on the lead generation model, building out those campaigns and plans and systems and processes and understanding how to build the database the right way. But the minute that happens, be ready. Be ready to make some money. And once you make some money, you have to have a budget. Now, I will self-proclaim that the budget model is my favorite model, and here's why. Because I think the budget model allows you to take a step above your business, look down, and make ridiculously important decisions if you understand the budget model. Now, on page 152 of MREA, Gary says this: most agents just can't get their heads around the fact that a budget is a powerful financial planning tool. A powerful financial planning tool. So we'll dive into and understand the cost of sale, right? What is the seller specialist and how do they get paid? What is the buyer specialist and how do they get paid? What is cost of sale? What should my operating expenses be? You see those on your screen, right? We'll understand why 12% of our GCI goes to salaries, 9.2% of our lead generation goes to, or of our GCI goes to lead generation. And interestingly enough, once we understand how this budget works with our business, we will make business decisions to stay in line with the MREA budget model, right? This is for those of you who have ever wondered, should I spend money on this or should I not? Should I spend money on this or should I not? Once we finish 2 weeks of the budget model, I guarantee you will look at your budget differently. You will look at your business decisions around where you spend money, or how we'll change your language where you invest money completely differently. And now, is everyone slightly different? Is everyone's business on a call different? Absolutely. Everyone on the call today has a slightly different business. And that's why page 157 is one of my favorite pages, because it takes different production levels and says, hey, listen, here's the percentages. Interestingly enough, percentages don't change a whole lot, right? If you're looking at your screen, look at salaries, right? At $6 million in production, you're spending 11% or investing 11% of your GCI on salaries. 12% at 10 million, 13% at 16 million, 12.5% at 26, 12% at 40 million. It doesn't deviate a whole lot. It doesn't deviate a whole lot. So we're going to talk about placeholding investments in your business and how that budget model will actually drive growth. We'll go through the 3 key areas of your budget model: leading with revenue, playing red light, green light. Well, how do I do that? How do I know? What does that mean? How do I hold my money accountable in our business? Some of us on the call I've talked to you before the call. You have incredible businesses, huge businesses, and really just implementing the budget model in a stronger way has the potential to change your net drastically. Then we're going to talk about sticking to the budget. Now, once you start talking about budget, you'll see that the budget forces you into the 4th model, which is the organizational model. It forces you to get an organization. Why? Because if you're managing your money properly, if you're investing your money back into the business, your business will grow. And at a certain point in time, you will be stepping out of real estate sales, should you choose, and really becoming a business owner, or becoming a talent scout is what I like to think of it. Right? You will begin to build an organizational model. And in that organizational model, we will go through the 3 key areas of your organization, right? Hiring administrative support, hiring talent, and training and consulting. And we'll go through, right, every role in the team. When should they be hired? Who should you hire? Who should you be looking for? Where do you find them? What does that role description look like? How do you train and consult them? How do you hold them accountable? The reality is we're going to be diving into MREA and the best practices of the organizational model, while also bringing in some conversations around career visioning and 30, 60, 90, as well as, right, just the role descriptions on my current team as well, just sharing, right, what worked and what didn't work. Here's what's interesting. In the organizational model, you'll find very quickly that some of us, right, we have an organization, it's just with the wrong people, or we just didn't set it up properly, right? We just didn't set it up properly up front, so how do we go back in and now adjust those teams or organizations? We'll spend quite a bit of time on page 237 of MREA, which is capacity talent and cul-de-sac talent. Interestingly enough, both are talent. Right? How do we find capacity talent? Where do we place cul-de-sac talent? Where do we need each of them in our business? At the end of the day and at the end of the course, what you're going to realize is business is an art and a science. The art, Gary says, is the motivation and inspiration that you personally bring to your business. All of us have it. We're at different levels there. Some of us are incredibly motivated and inspired at this moment in our lives, and some of us need to build that back, and that's okay. We have to have the art. We have to have motivation and inspiration for the business. But if we don't have the science of the business, we're still not going to get to where we want to go, no matter how motivated or inspired we are. And maybe that's where you're at, right? You think, man, I love this business. I want a big business so bad. I'm so motivated. I'm so inspired. Yet I just haven't plugged into a science or a model, right? A science or a model that will get me to that goal. So we're going to talk mostly about the science. Now, I hope we find our art along the way, but really, Model Your Way to $1 Million is 100% focused on, let's understand that science, let's dissect that science, let's jump into that science, and then understand that. So on your screen is a website. It's modelyourway.com. It's going to bring you directly to the MAPS group coaching program page where you can sign up. We start on May 2nd. Right? So we're about less than a week away. We'll dive in. It's perfect timing to have this call. What I want you to know is it's a ridiculous passion of mine to get as many KW or non-KW agents, but as many, especially of our own agents, focused on building their business around the Millionaire Real Estate Agent book. It completely transformed my business. And now as we coach, it's so awesome to see this sort of culture around this group. Right, we have a private Facebook group that we communicate with right now, years after we've gone through this, but this culture of people 100% focused on joining this path of building your business built around the 4 main models, and quite honestly, the 5th model, which I call the mindset model, right? So it's the mindset model, first 128 pages, the economic model, the lead generation model, the budget model, and the organizational model. I hope you join me next week. Go to modelyourway.com. Sign up for the class. We start next week. It'll run every single Tuesday for 10 weeks. Those calls are live. So those of you with questions, the calls are live. So I do those calls myself personally live every single week. There's question and answer at the end. The call is then uploaded. We'll be sharing a bunch of basically all of our systems and tools and models on Basecamp as well, a platform that we'll use to share documents and spreadsheets and follow-up plans along the way, and mission, vision, values, beliefs, and perspectives. So it is an all-inclusive, basically taking the business, placing it in a box, and saying, hey, join me for 10 weeks, right? Commit to those 10 weeks. And if there's a week that you're on vacation, again, those calls are recorded. They'll be up for you to listen after, probably the day after the call is placed. Any questions that I can answer about the course or about any of the material that we went over? I'm not sure if we have the ability to take questions. I think everyone is muted. *6 might unmute you. If not, I'll look at the dialog box as well if any questions were uploaded. All right, guys. Awesome. I appreciate your time today. Any questions, reach out to me as well. Most of you are connected to me on Facebook. Again, Chris Suarez is my name. ModelYourWay.com is the website to sign up for the class. I appreciate your time, and glad I was able to talk at least a little bit about the models today. Thanks, guys.